Yoe, Yoe, Yoe goes the refrain. A million deaths were not enough for Yoe. From A Child's History of Maud Dib by the Princess Irulin. The door stood ajar, and Jessica stepped through it into a room with yellow walls. To her left stretched a low settee of black hide and 2 empty bookcases. A hanging water flask with dust on its bulging sides. To her right, bracketing another door, stood more empty bookcases. A desk from Caladan and 3 chairs. At the windows directly ahead of her stood Dr. Yue, his back to her, his attention fixed upon the outside world. Jessica took another silent step into the room. She saw that Yue's coat was wrinkled, a white smudge near the left elbow, as though he had leaned against chalk. He looked, from behind, like a fleshless stick figure in overlarge black clothing, a caricature poised for stringy movement at the direction of a puppet master. Only the squarish block of head, with long ebony hair caught in its silver sook skull ring at the shoulder, seemed alive, turning slightly to follow some movement outside. Again, she glanced around the room, seeing no sign of her son, but the closed door on her right, she knew, led into a small bedroom for which Paul had expressed a liking. "Good afternoon, Dr. Yue," she said. "Where's Paul?" He nodded as though to something out the window, spoke in an absent manner without turning. "Your son grew tired, Jessica. I sent him into the next room to rest." Abruptly, he stiffened, whirled his mustache flopping over his purpled lips. "Forgive me, my lady. My thoughts were far away. I did not mean to be familiar." She smiled, held out her right hand. For a moment, she was afraid he might kneel. "Wellington, please. To use your name like that, We've known each other 6 years," she said. "It's long past time formalities should have been dropped between us, in private." Yue ventured a thin smile, thinking, "I believe it has worked. Now she'll think anything unusual in my manner is due to embarrassment. She'll not look for deeper reasons when she believes she already knows the answer." "I'm afraid I was wool gathering," he said. "Whenever I feel especially sorry for you, I'm afraid I think of you as, well, Jessica." "Sorry for me? Whatever for?" Yue shrugged. Long ago he had realized Jessica was not gifted with the full truth-say as his Juana had been. Still, he always used the truth with Jessica whenever possible. It was safest. "You've seen this place, my Jessica." He stumbled over the name, plunged ahead. "So barren after Caladan. And the people, those townswomen we passed on the way here, wailing beneath their veils. The way they looked at us." She folded her arms across her breast, hugging herself, feeling the crisp knife there, a blade ground from a sandworm's tooth. If the reports were right, it's just that we're strange to them. Different people, different customs. They've known only the Harkonnens. She looked past him out the windows. "What were you staring at out there?" He turned back to the window. "The people." Jessica crossed to his side, looked to the left toward the front of the house where Yue's attention was focused. A line of 20 palm trees grew there. The ground beneath them swept clean barren. A screen fence separated them from the road upon which robed people were passing. Jessica detected a faint simmering in the air between her and the people, a house shield, and went on to study the passing throng, wondering why Yue found them so absorbing. The pattern emerged, and she put a hand to her cheek. The way the passing people looked at the palm trees, she saw envy, some hate, even a sense of hope. Each person raked those trees with a fixity of expression. "Do you know what they're thinking?" Yue asked. You profess to read minds? She asked. Those minds, he said. They look at those trees and they think, there are 100 of us. That's what they think. She turned a puzzled frown on him. Why? Those are date palms, he said. One date palm requires 40 liters of water a day. A man requires 8 liters. A palm, then, equals 5 men. There are 20 palms out there, 100 men. But some of those people look at the trees hopefully. They but hope some dates will fall, except it's the wrong season. We look at this place with too critical an eye, she said. There's hope as well as danger here. The spice could make us rich. With a fat treasury, we can make this world into whatever we wish. And she laughed silently at herself. Who am I trying to convince? The laugh broke through her restraints, emerging brittle without humor. But you can't buy security, she said. Yue turned away to hide his face from her. If only it were possible to hate these people instead of love them. In her manner, in many ways, Jessica was like his Wana, yet that thought carried its own rigors, hardening him to his purpose. The ways of the Harkonnen cruelty were devious. Wana may not be dead. He had to be certain. Do not worry for us, Wellington, Jessica said. The problem's ours, not yours. She thinks I worry for her. He blinked back tears. And I do, of course. But I must stand before that Black Baron with his deed accomplished, and take my one chance to strike him where he is weakest, in his gloating moment. He sighed. Would it disturb Paul if I looked in on him? She asked. Not at all. I gave him a sedative. He's taking the change well, she asked, except for getting a bit overtired. He's excited, but what 15-year-old wouldn't be under these circumstances? He crossed to the door, opened it. He's in here. Jessica followed, peered into a shadowy room. Paul lay on a narrow cot, one arm beneath a light cover, the other thrown back over his head. Slatted blinds at a window beside the bed wove a loom of shadows across face and blanket. Jessica stared at her son, seeing the oval shape of face so like her own, but the hair was the Duke's, coal-colored and tousled. Long lashes concealed the lime-toned eyes. Jessica smiled, feeling her fears retreat. She was suddenly caught by the idea of genetic traces in her son's features, her lines in eyes and facial outline, but sharp touches of the father peering through that outline like maturity emerging from childhood. She thought of the boy's features as an exquisite distillation out of random patterns, endless cues of happenstance meeting at this nexus. The thought made her want to kneel beside the bed and take her son in her arms, but she was inhibited by Yue's presence. She stepped back, closed the door softly. Yue had returned to the window, unable to bear watching the way Jessica stared at her son. Why did Wana never give me children? He asked himself. I know as a doctor there was no physical reason against it. Was there some Bene Gesserit reason? Was she, perhaps, instructed to serve a different purpose? What could it have been? She loved me, certainly. For the first time he was caught up in the thought that he might be part of a pattern more involuted and complicated than his mind could grasp. Jessica stopped beside him, said, What delicious abandon in the sleep of a child. He spoke mechanically. If only adults could relax like that. Yes. Where do we lose it? He murmured. She glanced at him, catching the odd tone, but her mind was still on Paul, thinking of the new rigors in his training here, thinking of the differences in his life now, so very different from the life they once had planned for him. We do, indeed, lose something, she said. She glanced out to the right at a slopey, humped with a window troubled gray-green of bushes. Dusty leaves and dry claw branches, The too dark sky hung over the slope like a blot, and the milky light of the arcane sun gave the sheen a silver cast, light like the crysknife concealed in her bodice. The sky's so dark, she said. That's partly the lack of moisture, he said. Water, she snapped. Everywhere you turn here, you're involved with the lack of water. It's the precious mystery of Arrakis, he said. Why is there so little of it? There's volcanic rock here. There are a dozen power sources I could name. There's polar ice. They say you can't drill in the desert. Storms and sand tides destroy equipment faster than it can be installed, if the worms don't get you first. They've never found water traces there anyway. But the mystery, Wellington, the real mystery is the wells. They've been drilled up here in sinks and basins. Have you read about those? First a trickle, then nothing, he said. But Wellington, that's the mystery. The water was there. It dries up, and never again is there water. Yet another hole nearby produces the same result. A trickle, then stops. Has no one ever been curious about this? It is curious, he said. You suspect some living agency? Wouldn't that have shown in core samples? What would have shown? Alien plant matter or animal? Who could recognize it? She turned back to the slope. The water has stopped. Something plugs it. That's my suspicion. Perhaps the reason's known, he said. The Harkonnen sealed off many sources of information about Arrakis. Perhaps there was reason to suppress this. What reason? She asked. And then there's the atmospheric moisture. Little enough of it, certainly, but there's some. It's the major source of water here, caught in wind traps and precipitators. Where does that come from? The polar caps? Cold air takes up little moisture, Wellington. There are things here behind the Harkonnen veil that bear close investigation, and not all of those things are directly involved with the spice. We are indeed behind the Harkonnen veil, he said. Perhaps we'll... He broke off, noting the sudden intense way she was looking at him. Is something wrong? The way you say Harkonnen, she said. Even my Duke's voice doesn't carry that weight of venom when he uses the hated name. I didn't know you had personal reasons to hate them, Wellington. Great Mother, he thought. I've aroused her suspicions. Now I must use every trick my Wana taught me. There's only one solution. Tell the truth as far as I can. He said, You didn't know that my wife, my Wana... He shrugged, unable to speak past a sudden constriction in his throat. Then, the words would not come out. He felt panic, closed his eyes tightly, experiencing the agony in his chest and little else until a hand touched his arm gently. Forgive me, Jessica said. I did not mean to open an old wound. And she thought, those animals. His wife was Bene Gesserit. The signs are all over him. And it's obvious the Harkonnens killed her. Here's another poor victim bound to the Atreides by a caram of hate. I'm sorry, he said. I'm unable to talk about it. He opened his eyes, giving himself up to the internal awareness of grief. That, at least, was truth. Jessica studied him, seeing the up-angled cheeks, the dark sequins of almond eyes, the butter complexion and stringy mustache hanging like a curve frame around purpled lips and narrow chin. The creases of his cheeks and forehead, she saw, were as much lines of sorrow as of age. A deep affection for him came over her. Wellington, I'm sorry we brought you into this dangerous place, she said. I came willingly, he said. And that, too, was true. But this whole planet's a Harkonnen trap. You must know that. It will take more than a trap to catch the Duke Leto, he said. And that, too, was true. Perhaps I should be more confident of him, she said. He is a brilliant tactician. We've been uprooted, he said. That's why we're uneasy. And how easy it is to kill the uprooted plant, she said. especially when you put it down in hostile soil. Are we certain the soil's hostile? There were water riots when it was learned how many people the Duke was adding to the population, she said. They stopped only when the people learned we were installing new wind traps and condensers to take care of the load. There is only so much water to support human life here, he said. The people know if more come to drink a limited amount of water, the price goes up and the very poor die. But the Duke has solved this. It doesn't follow that the riots mean permanent hostility towards him. And guards, she said. Guards everywhere. And shields. You see the blurring of them everywhere you look. We did not live this way on Caladan. Give this planet a chance, he said. But Jessica continued to stare hard-eyed out the window. I can smell death in this place, she said. Hawat sent advance agents in here by the battalion. Those guards outside are his men. The cargo handlers are his men. They've been unexplained withdrawals of large sums from the treasury. The amounts mean only one thing: bribes in high places. She shook her head. Where the fur Hawat goes, death and deceit follow. You malign him. Malign? I praise him. Death and deceit are our only hopes now. I just do not fool myself about the fur's method. You should. Keep busy, he said. Give yourself no time for such morbid. Busy? What is it that takes most of my time, Wellington? I am the Duke's secretary, so busy that each day I learn new things to fear, things even he doesn't suspect I know. She compressed her lips, spoke thinly. Sometimes I wonder how much my Bene Gesserit business training figured in his choice of me. What do you mean? He found himself caught by the cynical tone, the bitterness that he had never seen her expose. Don't you think, Wellington, she asked, that a secretary bound to one by love is so much safer? That is not a worthy thought, Jessica. The rebuke came naturally to his lips. There was no doubt how the Duke felt about his concubine. One had only to watch him as he followed her with his eyes. She sighed. You're right. It's not worthy. Again she hugged herself, pressing the sheathed crysknife against her flesh and thinking of the unfinished business it represented. There will be much bloodshed soon, she said. The Harkonnens won't rest until they're dead or my Duke destroyed. The Baron cannot forget that Leto is a cousin of the royal blood, no matter what the distance. While the Harkonnen titles came out of the comb pocketbook, but the poison in him, deep in his mind, is the knowledge that an Atreides had a Harkonnen banished for cowardice after the Battle of Corran. The old feud, Yue muttered, and for a moment he felt an acid touch of hate. The old feud had trapped him in its web, killed his Wana, or, worse, left her for Harkonnen tortures until her husband did their bidding. The old feud had trapped him, and these people were part of that poisonous thing. The irony was that such deadliness should come to flower here on Arrakis, the one source in the universe of melange, the prolonger of life, the giver of health. What are you thinking? She asked. I am thinking that the spice brings 620,000 Solaris the decagram on the market right now. That is wealth to buy many things. Does greed touch even you, Wellington? Not greed. What then? He shrugged. Futility. He glanced at her. Can you remember your first taste of spice? It tasted like cinnamon, but never twice the same, he said. It's like life. It presents a different face each time you take it. Some hold that the spice produces a learned flavor reaction. The body, learning a thing is good for it, interprets the flavor as pleasurable, slightly euphoric, and, like life, never to be truly synthesized. I think it would have been wiser for us to go renegade, to take ourselves beyond the imperial reach, she said. He saw that she hadn't been listening to him, focused on her words, wondering, yes, why didn't she make him do this? She could make him do virtually anything. He spoke quickly, because here was truth and a change of subject. Would you think it bold of me, Jessica, if I asked a personal question? She pressed against the window ledge in an unexplainable pang of disquiet. Of course not. You're my friend. Why haven't you made the Duke marry you? She whirled, head up, glaring. Made him marry me? But I should not have asked, he said. No, she shrugged. There's a good political reason. As long as my Duke remains unmarried, some of the great houses can still hope for alliance. And, she sighed, motivating people, forcing them to your will, gives you a cynical attitude toward humanity. It degrades everything it touches. If I made him do it, then it would not be his doing. It's a thing my Juana might have said, he murmured, and this too was truth. He put a hand to his mouth, swallowing convulsively. He had never been closer to speaking out, confessing his secret role. Jessica spoke, shattering the moment. Besides Wellington, the Duke is really two men. One of them I love very much. He's charming, witty, considerate, tender, everything a woman could desire. But the other man is cold, callous, demanding, selfish, as harsh and cruel as a winter wind. That's the man shaped by the father. Her face contorted. If only that old man had died when my Duke was born. In the silence that came between them, a breeze from a ventilator could be heard fingering the blinds. Presently, she took a deep breath, said that I was right. These rooms are nicer than the ones in the other sections of the house. She turned, sweeping the room with her gaze. If you'll excuse me, Wellington, I want another look through this wing before I assign quarters. He nodded. Of course. And he thought, if only there was some way not to do this thing that I must do. Jessica dropped her arms, crossed to the hall door and stood there a moment, hesitating, and let herself out. All the time we talked he was hiding something, holding something back, she thought. To save my feelings, no doubt. He's a good man. Again, she hesitated, almost turned back to confront Yue and drag the hidden thing from him. But that would only shame him, frighten him to learn he's so easily read. I should place more trust in my friends. Many have marked the speed with which Maud Dib learned the necessities of Arrakis. The Bene Gesserit, of course, know the basis of this speed. For the others, we can say that Maud Dib learned rapidly because his first training was in how to learn, and the first lesson of all was the basic trust that he could learn. It is shocking to find how many people do not believe they can learn, and how many more believe learning to be difficult. Maud Dib knew that every experience carries its lesson. From The Humanity of Maud Dib by the Princess Irulan. Paul lay on the bed feigning sleep. It had been easy to palm Dr. Yue's sleeping tablet, to pretend to swallow it. Paul suppressed a laugh. Even his mother had believed him asleep. He had wanted to jump up and ask her permission to go exploring the house, but had realized she wouldn't approve. Things were too unsettled yet. No, this way was best. If I slip out without asking, I haven't disobeyed orders, and I will stay in the house where it's safe. He heard his mother and Yue talking in the other room. Their words were indistinct. Something about the spice, the Harkonnens. The conversation rose and fell. Paul's attention went to the carved headboard of his bed, a false headboard attached to the wall and concealing the controls for this room's functions. A leaping fish had been shaped on the wood with thick brown waves beneath it. He knew if he pushed the fish's one visible eye that would turn on the room's dispenser lamps. One of the waves, when twisted, controlled ventilation. Another changed the temperature. Quietly, Paul sat up in bed. A tall bookcase stood against the wall to his left. It could be swung aside to reveal a closet with drawers along one side. The handle on the door into the hall was patterned on an ornithopter thrust bar. It was as though the room had been designed to entice him. The room and this planet. He thought of the film book Yue had shown him. Arrakis, His Imperial Majesty's Desert Botanical Testing Station. It was an old film book from before discovery of the spice. Names flitted through Paul's mind, each with its picture imprinted by the book's mnemonic pulse. Saguaro, burrow bush, date palm, sand verbena, evening primrose, barrel cactus, incense bush, smoke tree, creostone bush, kit fox, desert hawk, kangaroo mouse. Names and pictures from a man's tyrannic past, and many to be found now nowhere else in the universe, except here on Arrakis. So many new things to learn about. The spice and the sandworms. The door closed in the other room. Paul heard his mother's footsteps retreating down the hall. Dr. Yue, he knew, would find something to read and remain in the other room. Now was the moment to go exploring. Paul slipped out of the bed, headed for the bookcase door that opened into the closet. He stopped at a sound behind him, turned. The carved headboard of the bed was folding down onto the spot where he had been sleeping. Paul froze. Immobility saved his life. From behind the headboard slipped a tiny hunter-seeker, no more than 5 centimeters long. Paul recognized it at once. A common assassination weapon that every child of royal blood learned about at an early age. It was a ravening silver of metal, guided by some nearby hand and eye. It could burrow into moving flesh and chew its way up nerve canals to the nearest vital organ. The seeker lifted, swung sideways across the room and back. Through Paul's mind flashed the related knowledge, the hunter-seeker limitations. Its compressed suspensor field distorted the vision of its transmitter eye. With nothing but the dim light of the room to reflect his target, the operator would be relying on motion, anything that moved. A shield could slow a hunter, give time to destroy it. But Paul had put aside his shield on the bed. Lasguns would knock them down, but lasguns were expensive and notoriously cranky of maintenance. And there was always the peril of explosive pyrotechnics if the laser beam intersected a hot shield. The Atreides relied on their body shields and their wits. Now, Paul held himself in near catatonic mobility, knowing he had only his wits to meet this threat. The hunter-seeker lifted another half-meter. It rippled through the slatted light from the window blades, back and forth, quartering the room. I must try to grab it, he thought. The suspensor field will make it slip around the bottom. I must grip tightly. The thing dropped a half-meter, quartered to the left, circled back around the bed. A faint humming could be heard from it. Who was operating that thing, Paul wondered. It has to be somewhere near. I could shout for Yue, but it would take him the instant the door opened. The hall door behind Paul creaked. A rap sounded there. The door opened. The hunter-seeker arrowed past his head toward the motion. Paul's right hand shot out and down, gripping the deadly thing. It hummed and twisted in his hand, but his muscles were locked on it in desperation. With a violent turn and thrust, he slammed the thing's nose against the metal door plate. He felt the crunch of it as the nose eye smashed and the seeker went dead in his hand. Still, he held it to be certain. Paul's eyes came up, met the open stare of total blue from the shut mapes. Your father has sent for you, she said. There are men in the hall to escort you. Paul nodded, his eyes and awareness focusing on this odd woman in a sack-like dress of bondsman brown. She was looking now at the thing clutched in his hand. I've heard of such like, she said. It would have killed me, not so. He had to swallow before he could speak. I was its target. But it was coming for me. Because you were moving, and he wondered, who is this creature? Then you saved my life, she said. I saved both our lives. Seems like you could have let it have me and made your own escape, she said. Who are you? He asked. The Shadout Mapes housekeeper. How did you know where to find me? Your mother told me. I met her at the stairs to the weirding room down the hall. She pointed to her right. Your father's men are still waiting. Those will be Hawat's men, he thought. We must find the operator of this thing. Go to my father's men, he said. Tell them I've caught a hunter-seeker in the house, and they're to spread out and find the operator. Tell them to seal off the house and its grounds immediately. They'll know how to go about it. The operator's sure to be a stranger among us. And he wondered, could it be this creature? But he knew it wasn't. The seeker had been under control when she entered. Before I do your bidding, manling, Mapes said, I must cleanse the way between us. You've put a water burden on me that I'm not sure I care to support. But we Fremen pay our debts, be they black debts or white debts, and it's known to us that you've a traitor in your midst. Who it is we cannot say, but we're certain sure of it. Mayhap there's the hand guided that flesh cutter. Paul absorbed this in silence. A traitor. Before he could speak, the odd woman whirled away and ran back toward the entry. He thought to call her back, but there was an air about her that told him she would resent it. She told him what she knew, and now she was going to do his bidding. The house would be swarming with Hawat's men in a minute. His mind went to the other parts of that strange conversation. Weirding room. She looked to his left where she had pointed. We Fremen. So that was a Fremen. He paused for the mnemonic blink that would store the pattern of her face in his memory. Prune-wrinkled features, darkly browned, blue on blue eyes without any white in them. He attached the label, the Shadout Mapes. Still gripping the shattered seeker, Paul turned back into his room, scooped up his shield belt from the bed with his left hand, swung it around his waist, and buckled it as he ran back out and down the hall to the left. She'd said his mother was someplace down here. Stairs. A weirding room.